Welcome to Talking Tuesdays with the Starch Queens. I'm Jeanne Schumacher, the Queen of Diamonds, and my partner Nancy Matthews is the Queen of Hearts. And together, we're the Starch Queens. Our online support, weight loss, and lifestyle program provides coaching, recipes, and an education that helps everyone find weight loss success and healing. You can find our program at www.sqweightloss.com. Tonight, we have Dr. David Duniaef from medicalcompassmd.org, who specializes in helping people to change their health destiny through plant-based living. So thank you, Doc, for taking the time to be with us for Ask the Doctor.
Thanks, actually, doctor. Thanks for the introduction. It's actually medicalcompassmd.com.
What did I say?
Not .org. You said .org.
Oh, my bad.
That's fine.
I'll make sure we note it down below.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here tonight. So, what is heart disease? Why is it important? Is there a way to prevent and reverse heart disease with conventional medicine? And is there a way to reverse lifestyle? Take it away, Doc.
These are great questions. Heart disease is made up of a number of different diseases, but specifically what we want to focus on is coronary heart disease, or heart disease that means plaques in your arteries, atherosclerosis, what's called atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, what's called ASCVD, or plaques in your arteries. Much easier to remember plaques in your arteries. And the reason that it's so important is that heart disease is the #1 killer. And that means that 1 in 4 Americans who die each year will die of heart disease.
Wow.
Pretty scary. Isn't that amazing?
That is huge.
Right,
that's
right.
25%.
That's almost 25%, correct.
That's horrible.
That is horrible. And of those, the most common is the coronary heart disease, or the plaques in the arteries, the plaque buildup that we're all have heard before. And what happens is that this is the most common, but even more shocking than how many people will die is how many people are at risk of developing heart disease. And that is, for men and women who are in their 40s, about 45, their risk of developing heart disease is more than 50%. So in men, the risk of developing heart disease is 60% when they're age 45.
Wow.
And the risk of developing heart disease in women, lest we forget them, is 55% when you're 45 years old. I mean, so this is a tremendous risk. It's not just the risk of dying, it's the risk of developing the disease itself. So you can say that more than 1 out of 2 people will develop heart disease in their lifetime. Wow. So that's shocking. And so when you think about this, and then you think, well, are there symptoms to heart disease? And we always think, well, the heart attacks, there are symptoms. But heart disease develops over time. And as heart disease develops, initially there are no symptoms necessarily. But as you get to severe heart disease, there are more typical symptoms, or if you get to heart attacks, there are more typical symptoms, like you might have chest pain, shortness of breath. You might have upper body pain, where you have pain in your chest, in your upper abdomen, called the epigastric area, where you may have pain that radiates down your arms, where you may have pain in the neck, in the jaw, in the back, and you have the shortness of breath. The problem is some of these symptoms, like the pain in the upper abdomen, can be indigestion, so you can't necessarily differentiate it. So that makes it very difficult to say, well, am I having indigestion, or am I actually having a heart attack, or am I having unstable angina, which is the stage before a heart attack, where you have shortness of breath and you get out of breath just by sitting. And a lot of people have angina, which is chest pain without the shortness of breath necessarily, and it's not necessarily unstable yet. So you don't necessarily know what the symptoms are, and if you have symptoms, some people supposedly never have symptoms before they develop a heart attack.
Well, and for guys, wouldn't erectile dysfunction be a symptom?
Well, erectile dysfunction would be a symptom of erectile dysfunction would be a symptom potentially of atherosclerosis or plaques in your arteries. So yes, erectile dysfunction is important. And if you have that, most likely, if it's not due to nerve damage, it's due to atherosclerosis. So yes, that's a very good point that you make.
That's real quick, doctor. For example, I like you're talking about the symptoms and no symptoms. My dad had his first massive heart attack at 47 years of age, and then proceeded to have several more congestive heart failure. But my best friend's dad, at 60 years of age dropped dead or died in his sleep from the Widowmaker massive heart attack. He was thin, healthy, died in his sleep from a massive heart attack. No prior symptoms whatsoever.
What's interesting about that is when we think about risk factors for heart disease and family history, heart disease, you're qualified as high risk if your father had a heart attack at 55 or younger. So that 60-year-old would not qualify as high risk for heart disease.
Wow.
But if you're 65 and younger for women, if your mother had a heart attack when she's 65 or younger, then you'd be at high risk as well. But you technically wouldn't be at high risk, even though that's an increased risk of heart attack, obviously.
Wow.
So that's really scary. So that when you get symptoms of chest pain, when you get symptoms of indigestion, when you get back pain, when you get neck pain, when you get jaw pain, when you get shortness of breath, you'd like to know that those aren't actually symptoms of a heart attack. You'd like to know that you're doing everything you can to reduce the risk so that it's minimal, so that your chances of a heart attack are really low, so that every time you have that, you're not rushing to the emergency room going, am I having a heart attack?
I know, because it's hard to differentiate.
Right, and that's why you want to do things to prevent and reverse the disease before it becomes a real issue. And if you are, then you reduce the risk so much that you know, like for instance, when I work out, sometimes when I come back, I might have chest pain for a minute, and I realize it's muscular pain, and I can rule out heart disease right away because I know, excuse me, that what I'm doing, I'm getting all choked up over this topic. I know what I'm doing.
Breathe in, breathe out.
Right. I know that I'm doing the best I can. So the risk factors are very low. For heart disease.
A sip drink.
Right. We all take a sip of drink.
A sip break. Sip break.
Sip break, yes.
I'm a little delayed. I'm developmentally delayed. One of those.
Yeah, Dr. Duniaef, that's the thing. You know, my dad did have the symptoms when I was a teenager. That when this happened, I was getting my horse trailer ready to go over to a parade, and he was hooking up the horse trailer to his pickup, and he kept complaining about his arm hurting. And he's, you know, with the hitch in the trailer, he had to hook it on and then do some bolt stuff with a wrench. And I was, you know, looking at him, and, you know, of course, my dad was the pillar of strength. And he just seemed so weak because he just had this arm that was killing him. And then the next week, he had this massive heart attack at 47. So he did have symptoms.
Wow.
That's, you know, and it was 47.
Right.
Oh,
well, I had somebody in my in-laws, my father-in-law, he was working on the garage and he fell off the garage, and then he had a heart attack about a week later. And he said, well, did the garage create the heart attack? And the answer is no. He had been developing that heart attack over time. And it wasn't just that action, but, you know, it's not just one action that causes a heart attack. It's the development over time that we may not even see. And it may be silent for most of the time before it's really a problem.
Well, it's my father. My father dropped dead. I mean, literally, he was talking to my sister. He dropped dead. He was in mid-sentence. It was like somebody flipped a switch. He had a massive whatever. We don't know what. We don't, you know, dead's dead. I mean, what's the point? But he dropped dead. And, you know, he's had high blood pressure most of his life. And I remember that.
So
but
let's talk about what are the symptoms from a disease perspective. So what contributes to heart disease is high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. Those are all diseases that contribute to having coronary artery disease or coronary heart disease, whichever one you want to call it. But those contribute to create the plaques. And then if you want to look at the lifestyle, what contributes from lifestyle, it's a poor diet. It's a lack of physical activity or physical inactivity, whichever way you want to look at it. It's excess alcohol use. It's smoking. And those are the real problems and it's excess weight, of course. And those are the real problems with lifestyle. But there are risk factors that we can minimize in order to minimize a heart attack.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, my dad was, he grew up on a dairy. So, I mean, his diet was absolutely horrific. He ate in restaurants all the time when he was a truck driver. So his was, they always said, it was hereditary, but it was his poor diet. I mean,
Right.
My mom was this amazing cook who, was Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes with a stick of butter in it. And he fought high cholesterol and he took statins and, he had severe heart disease and it truly crippled him his entire life and ended up with congestive heart failure. And, it's just, but what scares me is so much is what happens when people have these heart attacks without symptoms. That's pretty scary stuff.
I think it's scary, period. I don't think it matters whether you have symptoms or you don't have symptoms.
Yeah.
I think it's scary, period. I don't
is.
think you can put it into a class of, well, I know I'm going to have symptoms or I don't know I'm going to have symptoms. Because you never do. And you don't even know if the symptoms are correlated. So when we look at this, though, what we want to think about is we've made such advances in conventional medicine. Have we made advances so much that we can prevent and reverse heart disease? Well, what we can do when it comes to conventional medicine is we can reduce the risk factors by treating high blood pressure. And that's very important. And if you need medication, stay on medication.
So you're dealing with the symptoms.
Right. You're dealing with the symptoms, but you're also dealing with the diseases related to heart disease, like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes. However, you're not directly dealing with the heart disease. You're dealing with the risk factors. And when you have the problem is when you have heart disease, you don't actually treat the heart disease. We don't actually have drugs that directly treat the heart disease. We have drugs that treat the diseases related to the heart disease that can increase the risk of the heart disease, but we don't actually have drugs that directly treat the atherosclerosis. We do not reverse plaques in your arteries. We try, we say we might be able to, but there's no evidence to suggest that it's the case. So when you're doing conventional medicine, you're preventing risk factors of comorbidities or diseases that contribute to heart disease, like the cholesterol and the high blood pressure. But you're not actually treating directly the heart disease, and you're not reversing the heart disease with these medications. So that's really an important point to make, and that's an important point to think about. And you can reduce risk, but you can't reverse heart disease.
Well, can you?
Conventional medicine. Yes, you can reverse heart disease, and that's a great question. But it comes from lifestyle. And lifestyle is the best way we know how currently. But it's really powerful. And there have been studies done by several people, but especially by Caldwell Esselstyn. He did a study with patients where he had 24 patients. He followed them for 12 years. Each patient had about an average of 2 to 3 events before they started the study. So they were in severe coronary artery disease or severe coronary heart disease, whichever one you want to use, but they had heart disease. So
I remember talking to him about the first study that he did. And he said to me with that twinkle in his eye, he said, they were actually sicker than I wanted them to be.
Yeah, they were sick patients in terms of that heart disease. Yeah. And so he followed them for 12 years. And what he found was that not one of them that stayed on the diet, that intense lifestyle change, had another cardiovascular event. While before that, they had 50 plus cumulative events before the study started. Now, the 6 people who fell off the study within the first year and a half, actually had a number of events right after that. So in a 5-year period, the first period was 5 years, then another 7 years. In the first 5-year period, those people who fell off had a number of events. They went back to having cardiovascular events. So it showed that people who stayed on the diet did very well. But that wasn't enough. So people said, well, it wasn't large enough. So he went on to do another study with 200 patients. And what he showed was that it was actually 198 patients. But of the 198 patients, 21 dropped out. And so when you compared the 21 who dropped out, which created a control group, and you compared it to the 178 that stayed in over 3.7 years. Sorry to give 3.7 instead of 4, but I don't know why it was 3.7. Who knows? It may have been their favorite number. But anyway, through the 3.7 years, what they found was that those who stayed on the diet, the 178 people, there was a 0.6% risk of a cardiovascular event. In other words, one patient had a cardiovascular event in that time period, whereas out of the 21 people who dropped out, more than 60% of people had a cardiovascular event in that time period. More than 60% versus 0.6%.
Wow.
So, I mean, that shows you the difference of being able to reverse it. But not only that, he was able to show through angiograms, through looking at blood vessels, through individual patients, and he published this, that you could show the narrowing in the blood vessel from the plaques actually disappeared, and the plaques disappeared, reversed, a number of years later. So when they showed it on angiogram, you could see the difference in individual patients. So this is what's so amazing about it. You could actually see the difference. You could see reversal. And Dr. Dean Ornish showed, showed reversal as well. So it's not as if it didn't happen more than once. It's not as if it didn't happen in a significantly large trial. Now you could say drug trials have 10,000 patients. And as people say, well, why don't nutrition studies, lifestyle studies have a large number of patients? Well, I think that Dr. Michael Greger hit the nail on the head when he said two things. One, it's very expensive to run large trials, but that's a cop-out because you could say, well, but you should still run large trials. But two, and this is the most important part, is that you don't need large trials to see a large effect.
Yeah.
In other words, when they run heart studies, for instance, when they were using a blood thinner, TPA for Genentech, they had to run 10,000 patients in order to show a 1% change over the standard drug, a 1% prevention of heart attack.
1%.
Right. They needed 10,000 patients for an absolute of 1%.
Wow.
Well, we also saw this during World War II. They had in Norway, when the Germans went in and overtook Norway, they took all the animals from the country and took them for their troops. And then everybody was basically plant-based. And so heart disease had been going up, up, up until the Germans came in. And then after that, heart disease started going down. It's like, we've known this for a while.
Right.
Yeah. No secret. That's for sure.
Right. Well, so when we look at this, we go, for instance, when we have people who have a very interesting study that was done, we go to treat heart disease and we try to prevent it from happening again. So we have someone who has heart disease, severe heart disease, so more than 70% blockage. And we put in a stent and we think, okay, a stent is going to do the job because it's going to, what a stent is basically fencing that covers over the plaque, so it pushes it against the wall so that it won't become a problem. And so then you open up the artery. So when you have stents, they did a study just recently that was published in The Lancet. So whenever you use the term they, people always say, who's they? Well, in this case, it was The Lancet, and it was done in England. And it was a study comparing stents to shams. And we wouldn't be able to do this in the United States, but they were able to do this in England for some reason, where they took about 200 patients and they split them, 105 in the stent group and about 95 in the sham group. And what they used was one coronary artery that had at least severe blockage of 70% or more. The average was 85% blockage. So we're not talking about patients who didn't have blockage. We're talking about patients who had severe blockage. And when they put the stents in versus not having the stents, the endpoint they were looking for was exercise tolerance. Did it change? And the difference was you got better exercise tolerance of 28 seconds in the stenting group, and in the placebo group, you got 11 seconds better exercise. And that was not statistically significant. But even if it were statistically significant, you're talking about 28 seconds better exercise, which is
wait.
exercise tolerance. What?
So they put a stent in one group and didn't do anything in the other group?
For 6 weeks, yes. And the other group agreed to it. Absolutely. And that showed that in one vessel disease, we don't know in multiple vessel disease, but in one vessel disease at least, stents aren't any better than placebo with medications.
Wow.
Wow.
Interesting.
Isn't that huge?
That's
So we don't
huge.
even have devices that prevent heart disease from happening or heart attack from happening.
Yeah.
And when you stent, what are you going to do? You're going to stent one artery in one spot, and then the rest of the body doesn't have any plaques, or the rest of the coronary arteries will not develop any plaques. They're
Right.
going to develop more plaques. So you're not really answering the question anyway. And plus, the plaques that kill you are the ones that are not 85%. The ones that kill you are the immature plaques that are less than 40% that we can't see with a catheter when we go in to look at the heart on angiogram. So we don't know which ones are going to kill you because we can't stent them because we can't find them. They're wearing camouflage.
I think the answer to this would be, let's not eat foods that have cholesterol in them.
Let's eat a whole foods plant-based diet. And
Right.
what happened with Esselstyn's study on heart disease was that he kept people less than 150 milligrams per deciliter of cholesterol. So he kept the cholesterol less than 150, and he found that to be the most important aspect of it. Now, the Jupiter trial, which used statins, showed that if you dropped the CRP below 2 as well as kept the cholesterol down, you also reduced risk of heart disease. So inflammation is a very important part of heart disease as well. It's not just cholesterol. And when I've seen this with my patients, anecdotally, I had a patient, let me give you an example. He came to me, he had about 50% blockage, which is not severe blockage, but it's 50% blockage in his carotids. That's the
Now, how do you
arteries.
measure that?
I was just about to explain, and that was a great question. He has a cardiologist who measured it with a carotid Doppler. Carotid Doppler are non-invasive tests. They're ultrasound of the neck. So they're doing a carotid Doppler on the neck, or hence carotid Doppler is the neck because that's where the carotids are. Right, exactly. Thank you. You could draw on them, and right, exactly. So they're doing... Thank you. I love the emphasis on that. So they're doing the carotid Dopplers, and he had about 50% blockage. And then a year later, working with me on the lifestyle change, he had, with the same cardiologist, a 0 to 15% blockage, which meant that they couldn't see it anymore. Basically, it was nothing there. And more importantly, the inflammation went down. Now, you would say that's great, but what was the cardiologist's reaction? You can't reverse heart disease. Even though he's the one who did the ultrasound at stage 0 and stage 1 a year later. And he said, but congratulations on the reduction in inflammation. I'm really impressed. But you can't reverse heart disease. So some people still don't believe that you can reverse heart disease, even when they're demonstrating it, that it is reversing. So it's very important that the community understand that. Well, I think that about 50% of cardiologists believe you can reverse heart disease.
We have questions.
Yes.
Jeanne, go ahead, Jeanne, real quick, but then we've got some a good list of questions to dive into.
Yes.
Well, just dead air.
Bum.
Okay. So when I went to my doctor, I did the CRP. And, I asked her, I said,
What does CRP stand for?
C-reactive protein.
Thank you. Just identify it for your audience.
Excellent.
And what's the importance of CRP?
The inflammation.
Correct. It's vascular inflammation. Exactly. It's not as specific to the heart as you think, but it's vascular inflammation. And vascular inflammation is probably more important than just heart inflammation because vascular is throughout the body. And we have about 230 miles of vasculature.
Right.
Everywhere.
So I had it done, And I said to my doctor when we got the results back, because it was high, I said, I want to do this again in 6 months. And she said, why? I said, because I want to see if it changes. She says, in my 20 plus years, 25 plus years of doing this, I've never seen the CRP change. I said, humor me. She says, most likely. She says, it's probably too soon to have the insurance pay for it. Whatever. I'll pay for it. Whatever. So we did, and it came down. And her response, it was probably bad test the first time.
So let me give you an idea. With people who are adherent, let me say that 3 times fast, adherent to the diet, to lifestyle changes. I see in my practice all the time, if they have high CRP, they can cut the CRP in half in a month. And in 2 months, they can cut it in half again. They can go from a CRP of, say, 6, anywhere from about 3 to 8 or 10, about 3 to 10 is heart disease. Anything over 10 tends to be autoimmune disease, and anything in the range of 50 tends to be cancer. So people should know that too, because I've seen that. 50 plus tends to be cancer. Wow. That could be 40-something, high 40s, 50s, 60s. That tends to be cancer. Autoimmune disease tends to be 10 to about 30. And so when you have people between 3 and 10, the risk is really high. And you can bring this down month by month by cutting it in half.
Yeah.
And then and then to bring it down to average risk, it's 1 to 3. But that's average risk. You don't want average risk. You want optimal risk. So you want it to be less than 1. So you want to bring it down to less than 1 is the ideal. And that's the goal. And you can do that in several months. And it's not a fluke.
Wow.
And we've shown it repeatedly.
Mine was like super low. Really, I mean, like 1. I mean, it was my doctor.
Less than 1.
Less than 1. I mean, maybe a point something. And my doctor actually called me and she said she was giddy and she said, Nancy, you have absolutely no inflammation. Oh, you know what I was thinking of was the cholesterol ratio. That was way down there. She said you have absolutely no inflammation in your body whatsoever. So that was really exciting.
Well, you can't actually say that because it's only one inflammatory factor.
Yeah.
There are about 2,000 different ones. But it's great that you had low CRP. So I'm proud of you for having low CRP, but don't assume that every inflammatory factor is low because one is.
Right. Yeah, right. Just the one that she tested for was low.
Right. So I just want to make that clear.
I think that's a good point. Very good point. Well, let's take a question from one of our Starch Queen members. Her name is Lisa Sin, and this is going to get you. When I read her question, I was like, this goes back to that dang keto business. So Lisa asks, my husband has atrial fib, congestive heart failure, and an enlarged heart. So my dad. And she is asking, is CoQ10 supplement helpful in any way in treating this condition? It's because of the oil in it that he's wondering if it's good. Is there a plant-based equivalent for CoQ10? The reason I'm asking is all of a sudden he decided that coconut oil is good and he's putting it in his coffee. Okay,
so as far as that goes, that is one long question. But
in statement with a question.
Right. And in terms of answering that, CoQ10 is valuable for people who have heart failure. And the dose is 300 milligrams or more. And there have been studies that show that it helps with heart failure and reducing the risk of progression. So I would definitely say if you have heart failure, take at least 300 milligrams of CoQ10. You can take up to 600 milligrams, but take at least 300 milligrams. As far as it goes with coconut oil is a saturated fat. And anytime you take mega doses of saturated fat, like bulletproof coffee, they've always talked about bulletproof coffee. Bulletproof coffee is coffee with butter and coconut oil. And it's supposed to have this amazing effect.
I've never heard of that.
Right. It's called bulletproof coffee. What bulletproof coffee does is it's anything but bulletproof. It raises your cholesterol levels. And so, we don't know exactly how much coconut oil will raise your cholesterol levels or not, but we know that it potentially could raise your cholesterol levels.
Well, so, saturated fat.
Right. To take in, you're going to raise your LDLs. And so that's your bad cholesterol. And you don't want to do that.
You're going to also
so the answer is,
Go ahead. I was going to say, you're going to slow the velocity of your blood flow too,
Right.
by putting that fat right into your bloodstream.
Right. So you're going to get endothelial dysfunction, which means dysfunction of the inner parts of your blood vessel. And you're also going to get more atherosclerosis, which is plaques in your arteries, which means more heart disease, which is the #1 killer.
And inflammation.
Right. And inflammation.
Yep.
So the answer is don't use it.
Don't use coconut oil. Good point. We have another question from Starch Queens member, Susan Cooper. Susan asks, my question is about hypertensive heart NOS, N-O-S. What is it?
Well, I'm not sure what NOS is.
He writes, my question is about hypertensive heart NOS, N-O-S, and what is it?
Okay. I think NOS is something that comes up when you do diagnosis codes. NOS is something that just means non-specific, but I'm not really sure what NOS is.
Well, we'll have to get clarification from
Susan. Right,
we'll
have to get clarification from that.
We'll skip on to that one, and we'll go to another Starch Queens member question.
Can't we talk about what is the...
Well, we have one more question from Eva Marie.
Wait. So what is it that you want to talk
about? Hypertensive heart. Can't we talk about the hypertensive heart? What does that mean?
Well, hypertension puts a lot of pressure on the heart, and hypertension can increase the risk of a heart attack or cardiovascular disease or coronary heart disease. And so you want to reduce high blood pressure, and you can do this with lifestyle modifications. You can reverse this from happening. And what it does is it can put a lot of pressure. It can put afterload, a lot of pressure on the heart after it's ejecting, so that it's hard for the heart to eject blood. It can put preload, so it puts a lot of pressure on the heart so that it can't fill with blood enough. It can cause the blood, it can cause the heart to enlarge. It can cause all kinds of problems with the blood pressure going up. It can cause a clot to break off, and what we call a thrombi, which then becomes an emboli. That's all fancy words for clot. It can cause a clot to break off with the atherosclerosis or the plaques, and then you can get a heart attack or a stroke. So high blood pressure can cause all these problems.
Wow. So I have a question for you. I have a lady that I'm coaching, and she has had chronic hypertension for years and years and years. She's been able to greatly reduce the dosage. She's whole food, plant-based, and she's not using any type of sugar other than what's, in fruit and intrinsic in plants, but she's unable to get her blood pressure down to the point that she can get off the blood pressure medication. Is it possible that a person who's so sodium sensitive to have an issue with hypertension from intrinsic sodium when you eat a high plant-based diet? That's a question.
So in other words, you're saying that the plant-based diet may be causing the... So
no,
here's
I'm just asking, how come she can't get off of her blood pressure medication
here's the
when
thing.
she's doing everything right nutritionally,
but
is sodium sensitive?
Right. So here's the thing. You don't know if she's doing everything right exactly for her. That's the first thing.
There's no way of knowing.
Right. When you look, you need to evaluate. You need to look at all the labs. And you can't just say she's doing everything right. You haven't looked at the scale. You haven't looked at the cholesterol levels, because if the LDL is high, she may have narrowing in her arteries. She may have stiffening in her arteries. So it's not just due to salt. It can be due to fat. It can be due to a whole host of other things that are responsible for this. She may be overweight, and that fat may be contributing to it. The inflammation may be contributing to it. She may have a high CRP for all we know. She may have a high ESR, which is another inflammatory factor. She may have autoimmune disease, which may also play a role. So there's it's multifactorial. So you can't just say one thing, and you can't just say she's doing really well unless we look at it down to the specifics. The other thing is, when you look at sodium, I try to get patients, the range of sodium is usually about 135 to 145 on the scale in the blood. And I try to get patients below the halfway mark, and I think they do really well when they get to 139, but especially 136, because then you can rule out sodium as the contributor to blood pressure. But until they get to that level, you're not sure if sodium is playing a role. And also, you want to look at the potassium. And if the potassium is below 4, then there's not enough potassium. And the potassium to sodium ratio is very important. And that's what you want to look at, or the sodium-potassium ratio. Sorry, sodium to potassium ratio. And you want that to be less than 1. And so you want to get that potassium up. So I'm saying that there's so many factors that we're not necessarily looking at. And it's great that she's doing a whole foods plant-based diet. And obviously it's having a huge impact because it's lowering the medication, but we don't know what else she could be doing until we look at her as an individual on a one-on-one basis, where we look at the labs and we say, or another doctor looks at it and we look at the labs and we look at the scale and we look at the excess fat and we look at what's going on overall, and we look at all the different diseases that she might have or might not have. But we want to look at everything in tandem and look at the inflammation and stuff before saying we're doing everything we can. But
that makes sense.
Right.
Well, it's like peeling the onions of a layer back. That's what Nancy and I talk about all the time, is as you go on this journey, you start to realize there's other issues that are starting to surface because they've been masked by the chronic illness.
Everything else.
Yeah.
Correct. And if she's on a statin, for instance, the statin will cover over whether she has too much fat.
Oh, it's camouflaging it.
Right.
That makes sense.
What I find is I tend to lower people on the statin, and then they see their bad cholesterol go up, and they say, wait, my bad cholesterol went up. I say, but let's get it down with lifestyle, and then we can lower the statin even more. But if we keep it high, then we're never going to know, or if we cover it over with the statin, then we're never going to know how you're really doing, and we're never going to know, say, if you're overweight or obese, how to lose weight. The cholesterol profile helps identify what parts you're struggling with in terms of weight, if people are overweight or obese. And if you put a statin on there, you can't see it.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes sense. And so it makes me curious as to a regular practicing physician, a GP, is he going to go that extra step and say, we want you off your statins for how many days would a person be off their statins to be able to have it out of their system so it doesn't camouflage the fat?
First of all, would be depend on the individual. If you're on a statin for secondary prevention and you have heart disease, you wouldn't just take them off the statin, because that would be crazy.
That's what I was saying. It'd be a bad
worried
choice
to do that. You would go down very slowly. But if you're using it for primary prevention, you would go down slowly anyway. So if they're on, say, 20 milligrams of atorvastatin or rosuvastatin, Crestor, which is one of the most popular ones to use. Rosuvastatin is the generic. It's now generic. If they're on 20 milligrams, you could cut them down to 10 and see where they go from there, and then you could always put it back. But if it's primary, you're not as at risk for it. The second thing is, you don't really want to take somebody off their statin if their inflammation is still high. So if it's above, not 3, but 2, in the Jupiter trial, it showed that if it were above 2, it could have a significant effect with the CRP. So you don't want to take them off until their inflammation goes down. So now if their inflammation goes down, you could let them ride a little high with the cholesterol and then put it back on, or have them take it off and work with them for 3 to 6 months and see if they could get it down.
That's fantastic.
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that without asking the doctor and working with the doctor. I wouldn't go home and say, okay, let me try it on my own.
No, I'm just saying that to me would, I would, if I was a patient, I would have hope going and having a doctor that would work with me if I was the patient that needed this, to look at such a broad aspect of the whole body and everything in there. That would just be fantastic. So that's amazing.
Right. But taking someone down on drug.
Yeah.
Taking someone down on drug also requires putting them on a change. So if you need to put them on a whole food plant-based diet or a nutrient dense diet, but if you don't do that and you just take them down and say, well, change your diet, that's silly too. You got to make sure that you have some plan B to go into effect that drives the cholesterol down. You can't just wish it down on a star that it'll go down.
No magic pill.
No magic.
No magic pill. We have another question from a Starch Queens member, Eva Marie Schlosser. She says, Dr. Duniaef, I have congestive heart failure, diastolic. I take a diuretic to help with breathing, fluid retention. Is there something to naturally do this rather than having to take a prescription diuretic?
Well, first of all, diastolic heart failure is the least understood heart failure.
Interesting.
We treat diastolic heart failure in the same way that we treat systolic heart failure. Now, diastolic heart failure means it's where the filling occurs in the ventricles, whereas systolic heart failure is the ejection of the blood from the ventricles. We don't really know exactly how to treat diastolic with medication. And giving diuretic doesn't necessarily prolong life, and it treats symptoms. And it also has a negative impact on the kidneys. It can have a negative impact by drying them out. So you've got to be very careful with diuretic, period. So the best way to treat heart failure is to go on that lifestyle and see if you can overcome it through lifestyle modifications, because we're not even sure how to treat the diastolic to begin with. That doesn't mean we're not treating it. It just means we don't understand how to treat it. And that's a little scary to me, because we're treating it as if it's systolic and we don't understand the difference. We know there's a difference, but we don't really know what the medications would be that would change that. And when you're using a diuretic for the most part is symptomatic rather than longevity producing.
Wow. So
but I think what she was asking though, is there other things that you can do besides taking a pill diuretic? Like I know, like if I consume watermelon, oh my God, that's going to make me,
Well, what you can do is help reduce sodium levels, and you can help, but you got to be very careful. There was a study, and I give you the caveat. There was a study done with heart failure patients where they reduced sodium. They had 3 layers, okay? The 3 layers were too much sodium, too much salt, let's call it salt, too much salt, middle ground of salt, and no salt, okay? And what they found interesting was that the extremes had problems, but the one with no salt, actually patients started to die. So heart failure patients. And the thing is, you don't want to do this. And I don't know why they didn't stop the study when patients started to die, but the study continued for like 2 years or something like that. And the
when was this?
I have it's a couple of years ago, which was amazing to me. And the thing is, when you have a plant-based diet, you're never on no sodium, because dark leafy greens, and if you eat a lot of dark leafy greens every meal, there's about 800 milligrams of sodium at every meal. So you're never going to be low on sodium or salt. And so you're never going to have to worry about it. So if you take somebody and you put them on no salt, that's crazy. Meaning no salt in their diet whatsoever, no greens, no thinking about it. That would be, I think that's
dangerous.
Very dangerous. Yes, I didn't want to use a term that's
I think when they say no salt, I think they mean no salt added.
No,
table salt.
they meant no salt. No, they did not mean no salt added. They meant no salt in your diet. They did not mean table salt.
That would be virtually impossible.
No, it isn't.
How could you do it?
How would you do it?
You can do it. I mean,
eggs, bacon.
Right. Get foods that don't have any salt in them. There are foods that don't have any salt in them. Animal products don't have any salt in them naturally. Bacon has salt in it.
Yeah.
Salted. But I'm saying you can give foods that don't have any salt in them. You can give, for instance, how about just saltines with no salt in it? We know saltines can come without salt, which is kind of ironic because the name is saltines, but they can come without salt. So you can get food without salt.
That's wild.
What I'm saying is you want to get your salt from foods that naturally have salt predominantly, because it balances out with potassium and other great electrolytes like calcium and stuff like that.
Well, that's the cellular transport. You got the sodium and potassium going in and out of the cell, and that's how you've got this balance, this homeostasis going on. And with so much sodium that has been added to all the processed products, that has been adding a huge stress on that sodium potassium cellular transport.
Right, but so when you talk about this heart failure diastolic to act as a diuretic by reducing the sodium, you got to be careful about how much you're reducing the sodium. In other words, so what I'm trying to say is you can't just remove the sodium to be a diuretic, because the person will probably end up dying.
Yeah, that's not good.
Right.
Yeah.
You need salt. We all need salt. We're not made of water.
Yeah.
So that's not necessary. So,
Yeah.
Jeanne, so a long-winded answer, that's not necessarily the answer to acting as a diuretic naturally by removing the salt. Now, if you reduce the salt, that's one thing to bring the levels down to like 136 as opposed to 145 or 140. Yeah, that acts as more of a diuretic. And I see where you're going with that. So, and then flooding your system with more water isn't necessarily the answer either, because flooding your system with more water doesn't necessarily get rid of the sodium. The way to act as a diuretic is to have foods with more potassium. And the more potassium you have, the better you're going to be. And don't overdo it, but foods with potassium, like, I don't know, something out of this world that we've never heard of. An orange? Have you ever heard of an orange? That has a lot of potassium. Have you ever heard of Swiss chard? That has a lot of potassium. Banana doesn't have as much potassium as you think. Everybody thinks it has a lot of potassium, but Swiss chard, oranges have a lot of, almonds have a lot of potassium. Raisins have a lot of potassium. Bananas are on the lower end of the list. They're still good, they're fine, but they're not a lot of potassium comparatively to those foods.
I love Swiss chard.
If you raise the potassium, if you reduce the inflammation, and those parts will all play a role with diuretic aspect. And if you increase the nitric oxide from nitrates, and nitrates come from dark leafy greens, and they help vasodilate, and they help with the endothelial functioning, so they can help basically with the diastolic heart failure. So all that coming from lifestyle.
Eat your greens.
Leafy greens.
Yeah, and don't depend on diuretics as much, because diuretics forcibly does something to the body that you don't want necessarily.
Yeah, that's not good. Well, can the heart muscle actually heal and improve? But now, when my dad was taking medication, he was part of a drug trial through the VA, and he was taking a medication that actually did shrink, because his heart was 2.5 times the size of normal. So through medication, obviously there was no lifestyle there. He was truly taking medication. But through lifestyle and nutrition, a whole food plant-based lifestyle, has there been studies that we know we can reverse blockages and improve vascularly, but can the heart muscle actually improve and heal itself?
Well, in terms of the size of the heart, it has to do with preload and afterload. As I said before, the pressure as the blood's coming in and the pressure as the blood's trying to go out. And that can enlarge the heart. So if you can reduce that, which you can with lifestyle, you can reduce the size of the heart if it's enlarged.
Fabulous.
But we're getting off topic on that part.
On that one,
however, but that's fine. However, in terms of if you've had a heart attack, can you bring some of the muscle back? Well, the definition of a heart attack, the name of the heart attack is myocardial infarction. Infarction means death of tissue. Death of tissue. So no, you cannot, when you have a heart attack, bring back part of the tissue. You lose part of the tissue functioning. No matter what you do, that tissue no longer got enough oxygen. It's been completely cut off. So that's not ischemia. That's not lower oxygen. If you have ischemia, you can bring it back. But if you have infarction, by definition, you've just had death of tissue.
Yeah, my dad lost like 20% of his heart on his first. Yeah, and it was in the doctor. I remember when the doctor said that he had permanent heart damage as a result of his heart attack.
Right. Well, you can work around what you have, but you can't bring back muscle that's already died.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. That's
the
why
myocytes, which are the muscle cells of the heart, cannot be brought back if they're already dead.
Wow.
So you don't want to get to that point. Even if it's a minor heart attack, you still have a heart attack, which part of your heart is going to die.
Scary stuff. I know I never want to have one. I'm eating my dark leafy greens every day. So, Jeanne, you want to take the next question?
Sure. So, what is heart disease as it relates to increasing the risk of heart attacks?
Well, heart disease in terms of clots and in terms of atherosclerosis, it increases the risk dramatically. I mean, heart disease can lead to heart attack. That's how you end up getting a heart attack most of the time. Now, you can get a heart attack from sudden events, but most of the time you get heart attacks from slow progression of the plaques in your arteries. And eventually one of those plaques breaks off and ends up causing a blockage in the heart and creates a heart attack. So it's directly linked. So as you get heart disease, the development of a heart attack increases dramatically. Now, you can get heart attacks from other events as well, but that's the number one cause of a heart attack. That's what leads to a heart attack.
Wow.
Wow.
Sure.
I know. Okay, so what are the risk factors for heart disease, and can they be prevented or treated?
Well, the risk factors for heart disease we mentioned before, but we'll mention them again. The risk factors for heart disease are things like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity, and diabetes. And yes, they can be treated. And by treating them, you can help prevent heart disease from occurring. And you can do that by lifestyle, by treating the diabetes and losing weight in a healthy way, and by reducing the cholesterol, and by reducing the bad cholesterol, and by reducing the blood pressure, multifactorial, not just through sodium, but it might be through inflammation, and it might be through endothelial functioning, and it might be through fats. I mean, it can be all along. But what you can do, again, let me emphasize, one thing you can do with lifestyle that you cannot do in conventional medicine is reverse disease by reversing those plaques.
Wow.
And so you can reverse those plaques directly, whereas everything that's in conventional medicine has to do with treating the diseases that may exacerbate the heart disease,
Right.
but not directly treating the heart disease yet.
Wow. Wow.
You can reduce the risk potentially with a few drugs, but you can't directly reverse the heart disease necessarily.
And to think that the majority of all of this is a direct result of being a foodborne illness, foodborne disease in most cases. It's terrible.
Well, it's a lifestyle disease to some degree,
lifestyle disease, yeah.
And when you have the risk factors, you could be at higher risk for the disease because you've had your mother or father who had heart attacks at early ages, and so you have a higher risk. But either way, even if you don't have a high risk in family history, if you're going to supersize me, you're going to have problems with heart disease. If you're going to eat fast food or you're going to eat standard American diet, you're going to have increased risk of heart disease. Why does 60% of men and 55% of women, by the time they're age 45, are going to have an increased risk of heart disease? I mean, 6 out of 10 and 5.5, I don't know how you get a half a woman, but 5.5 out of 10 women will have heart disease sometime in their lifetime, and that is just huge.
Yeah, but I don't think you have to wait till they're in their 40s to have heart disease, because like John McDougall had a stroke at 18.
Right. You don't have to wait till you're right. You do not have to wait, but it's most common. But yes, you do not have to wait.
It's terrible. I mean, I'm 55. I'm in the target zone, and I have classmates. I've lost several female classmates to heart attacks. They drop dead of a heart attack.
And also, the symptoms of heart attacks for women are not necessarily the same as they are for men.
Exactly.
For women, we've heard that the symptoms for heart attack are that epigastric pain where you have that indigestion and you think, oh no, it's just heartburn. But it's heartburn that doesn't go away. And if it doesn't go away within half an hour or an hour, you want to really check to think to yourself, okay, I need to take an aspirin potentially. So let's think about aspirin. Do we have a question on aspirin?
We do.
Actually,
we do.
Otherwise, I would just start discussing it. But if we do, let's
we have a question on that. And so what does taking an aspirin a day do for you?
It keeps the doctor away.
And also, what does an aspirin do if you're currently having a heart attack?
Well, an aspirin can be very important if you're currently having a heart
They
attack.
say chew it up. Chew it up is what they
Right.
say if you're having
Why
it.
well, chew it up is because they want to have it absorbed very quickly. So you
Right.
want to chew it up very quickly. You
Yeah,
want to
they
take
taste
not a
awful.
baby aspirin, but a full aspirin.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
interestingly, and it can reduce the risk of a heart attack by a whopping 23%.
I'd take those odds in a heart
But
attack.
23% is not really that large.
Not
Not
when you
much.
compare
Still,
it to
you've
what a
got a
plant-based
lot.
diet does.
23% is nothing compared to what a lifestyle does.
Right.
So, but here's the thing. There was just a study that came out, and this is the weird thing, that shows that taking a baby aspirin works to reduce heart attack risk in people who weigh less than 154 pounds. So it reduces the risk of cardiovascular events by 23%, like I mentioned. But if you weigh more than 154 and you take a baby aspirin, supposedly, according to this study, it increases your risk of cardiovascular events.
What?
That's right.
Why?
It increases your risk of cardiovascular events. Not sure. However, you need to take 325 to 500 milligrams of aspirin, so an adult aspirin. And so taking an adult aspirin, well, what's the downside of that? Increases your risk of bleed. And you can have GI bleed, such as ulcers or hemorrhoids, but you can also have hemorrhagic stroke, which means that you can stroke out, have a bleed stroke, which is really hard to stop. So, but knowing that aspirin may have a problem when it's at 81 milligrams, it's not helping people over 154 pounds. I don't know about you, but I think most Americans are not only over 154 pounds, but way over 154 pounds, because you've got a problem where people are overweight or obese in 70% of the population. So 154 pounds ain't very much, and ain't is in the dictionary, and I'm just using it for emphasis. I would never write it down in an article or any statement I made, because ain't is not a good word to use. So it isn't a very good word to use. But for emphasis, what you want to say is some of these drugs are dangerous, and we didn't know that. And so what we think may be helping to reduce our risk may not be helping to reduce our risk, may be contributing to the cardiovascular event.
Wow.
Yes, it just came out the other day, contributing to the cardiovascular event. That is scary as, I don't know about you, but that's scary. Plus,
All get out scary.
Right.
I mean, considering a lot of people are taking aspirin thinking that they're doing themselves good by taking this aspirin a day. But I know when I walk around town and in the mall, I'm seeing the biggest majority of the population way over past the 150-pound mark.
Yes, way past the 150-pound mark. I said 154, so give him 4 more pounds.
Okay, 154.
Less than 154, so it's really 153.
So, which is killing me. It's just.
Yeah, it's not just killing you; it's killing them.
It's America. You know, yeah. Jeanne and I are on a mission to help as many people as we can and get the word out.
So,
I mean, if ISIS was doing this to us, we'd be all over them.
Right. So, talking about this, what about? Do we have a question about supplements like fish oil?
We do. What was that?
Well, because usually when you think about it, people take aspirin and they take fish oil.
Well, there was, the question was, is there?
That they try.
The question is there any benefit to fish oil?
Right. And so for a long time, Frank Hugh at Harvard School of Public Health, who's really well known and who runs the Nurses Health Study, a study that has Nurses Health Study 1, Nurses Health Study 2, and I think they're on to Nurses Health Study 3, and it's had like 90-something thousand people in the study, somewhere around there. It's a really large study. He said for the longest time that fish oil doesn't do anything really for secondary prevention. So somebody already has heart disease and they want to prevent prevent a heart attack, it's not going to do anything. But does it do anything for primary prevention? And now there was a study that came out looking at 10 randomized controlled trials. Those are the gold standard type trials. And it showed that fish oil reduced triglycerides, but actually had no effect on cardiovascular events or mortality. So basically, fish oil does nothing necessarily in terms of helping with cardiovascular disease. And for more and more, you see fish oil doesn't do anything for coronary heart disease or heart disease. You keep seeing it, and it becomes debatable, but then more and more say no, 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 and yet people take it. And it does have an effect of potentially blood thinning, but it doesn't necessarily do what you want it to do and reduce the risk of a heart attack or a cardiovascular event or having heart disease. So,
well, and plus there's a lot of toxins in the fish oil because they're
right,
concentrating it to get the oil out, and then they're,
right, I wouldn't waste your time on that. And anytime you take supplements are mega doses of something, just like medicines are. So supplements aren't as benign as people think. Supplements are unregulated medicines.
Right.
So they are concentrated forms. And so you want to be very careful about that. I mean, fish oil was also thought to help with dry eye. There was just a study done that was a year long that showed the fish oil did nothing for dry eye. Not one single indicator. They had like 12 indicators, not one single indicator. And this came out of University of Pennsylvania. Not one single indicator showed that fish oil did anything.
Yeah, that's nasty. What I think about in terms of fish oil is when we saw Rip Esselstyn in person down in the Bay Area, and he was talking about fish oil and the fact that the fish oil, is generally from, I believe he said mackerel, and it's rancid. The fish are in these terrible, deplorable conditions that they use for the fish oil. And fish oil is rancid, so like if you burp up that fishy taste, the 99% chance that the fish oil supplement you're taking is from rancid fish oil. So that's
Right.
disgusting. And what really fries me is the amount of money being spent and the commercials. I could sit and watch television for a half an hour and see 3 or 4 different fish oil commercials come on there. And it's in the billions of dollars that's just being wasted. You
If they
go
spend
to
their time
Costco
on,
and they have
right.
Costco has this huge display of their fish oil, and you see people just throwing it in the carts, and I'm just like, oh, don't waste your money.
Right. If they spent more time on their lifestyle changes and on their diet than on their right.
Literally.
Right. So
literally.
Let's do this, if you wouldn't mind, because it's after 9 and I don't want to keep people too long. Let's do this. Can we talk about future research potentially?
Well, that, and how about if we come back, because this has just been a fascinating topic.
Sure, absolutely.
We still have a lot more questions on our list.
We do. We have great questions still.
Sure. You want to do one more question and then we'll go to future research?
Why don't you just go right to future research right now, and then we'll come back, and in next month, when you come back on, we'll come back right to these questions.
Let's do future research.
Yep.
So when we look at the future research, this is connected to heart disease, actually. There's a study being done by UCSF and Stanford, which is great, a joint study being done. And they're taking Med-Cal patients, which is the same thing as Medicare patients. So people who can't afford it, which is wonderful. And they are giving them a plant-based diet with vegetables, and they're using a fish broth on top for taste. I know that's maybe not ideal, but it's 1,000% better than what they're doing already. And so they're comparing it to controls of 4,000 patients who aren't getting this. And what they're doing is they're seeing what the effect is over a 3-year period. And this is a ginormous study.
When was this started?
Just now. It's just recently started, within the last 6 months. Really within the last 3 months, probably. And it may not have been started, but it's pretty close to starting. So it may be within the last 3 months that it started, but it's it's a ginormous study. It's huge, and it's randomized and it's controlled. They're looking to see what effect it has, not on prevention, but these people have either coronary heart disease or they have diabetes. So these are people who already are sick, and they want to see if they can help treat this. What they're going to see probably, and what I would say is that they're going to see potentially reversal. The only downside to this is they're comparing it to the standard American diet. I would love to be able to say, okay, let's compare it the way the Adventist Health Study did, where you had people who are getting fish versus people who are getting vegan versus people who are getting lacto-ovo, a clean diet versus another relatively clean diet. good diets versus good diets, because anything you change from standard American diet, you'll still see an effect. So I think that you'll see an effect where you'll see reversal or a tremendous benefit with heart disease and with diabetes. And if you don't, I'll eat my hat. But like I would say, it's more likely I'll be eating my vegetables than my hat, because that reversal will happen, or the change will happen that will be pretty dramatic, because this is 1,000% better change. And this is really exciting that the community has embraced this, and that 2 really good major hospitals, medical centers in California are running this. So this is really encouraging, and it's going to be a 3-year trial, and I can't wait to see what the results look like. But I think that this is going to be beneficial.
That's amazing. So Dr. Duniaef, in closing, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, do you see patients remotely? Do they need to come to your facility? How does a person get in contact with you if they were wanting to learn more about lifestyle medicine?
Well, that's a great question. And I call it integrative medicine, lifestyle medicine, holistic medicine, functional medicine. You can use any of those terms if you want to use those terms. In terms of getting in touch with me, you can go to my website, which is themedicalcompassmd.com, or you can Google my name. And if you Google my name, Dr. David Duniaef, or you Google my name, David Duniaef, MD, my website will come up, and you can look at that website. And in terms of being able to treat patients, I treat patients generally, the first 2 appointments are in person. And then if somebody needs to be remote, it's fine. We can do it remotely. That's not a big deal. But at least for the first 2 visits, I like to have them there. And the first 2 visits are usually either 2 weeks or a month apart. And then after that, it depends on where they live. And we don't want to drive them crazy. But then we want to bring them in at least 6 months, once every 6 months if they're far away. But if they're not, I like to see them in person, because it does something to be able to examine someone.
Yeah, I would see
to be
that.
able to touch someone, to be able to weigh someone, to be able to talk to them face to face. But again, I've Skyped with people, and I've done that type of medicine, and it's fine, and they do well. And I have plenty of people who do that. But my preference is, if you can, in office is better.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if I had severe heart disease or any type of ailment like that, I'm on the West Coast. I know both of you are on the East Coast, but I wouldn't bat an eye of jumping on a plane and going to somebody like yourself or, Dr. Esselstyn. I mean, what kind of price tag do you put on your health? You've got to take care of yourself.
Think about the amount of money you spend. For instance, I have somebody who's on drugs, who's doing better, but he's getting, he's finally listening to me, but he's on Medicare and his drugs are paid for. And he's like, oh, but my drugs are paid for. But then you go and you have a donut hole with Medicare, where there's a 3-month period every year where they don't pay for your drugs. And then you realize how much they cost. And then you start spending $300-$600 a month if you're lucky. And that's per month additional just for drugs.
My mom's was $1,500. I didn't know what a donut hole was.
Right.
I mean, I was like, my dad had died, and I was like, what? What's a donut hole?
Yeah.
And I go to her pharmacy, and they said, it's $1,289. And I said, I think we need to run it through the insurance.
Right.
They said, no, she's maxed out her benefits.
Right.
And it's like, okay, this is something that they don't tell you in the fine print.
Right.
Scary stuff.
Do you take insurance?
What I do is, if you have Medicare, I take Medicare, where we submit the insurance for you. I'm out of what's called non-par. So then you can get reimbursement from Medicare and you get a check from them. And then as far as insurance goes with other people, we will submit the insurance for people. And if they have out-of-network privileges, they can get up to 80% back from what I charge. And I have this billing person who, if you think I'm good at medicine, she's just as good at billing, because she teaches the ICD. She teaches the ICD-10 codes, and she works at Stony Brook University Medical Center, and she works part-time for me. I don't know why, but she seems to like me. But she'll submit and do all the work, and she understands it really well, but she teaches the codes to future billers.
Wow.
So she's a professor at Stony Brook to do that with billing, and so she's amazing. So I pay her for my patients, so that you don't have to do the submission, because that's crazy. So I
Yeah.
pay her to help you. And the only reason I don't take it directly is that insurances, if I did, would want me to see patients for follow-up for 10 minutes at a time. And what can you get done in 10 minutes at a time? A shake,
Write a
a
prescription.
script. Right. A shake, a script, a
Yeah.
feel here, a statement
Cough.
there. Right. Cough for me. But you're not going to get a lot done. So,
Yes,
but
it's heartbreaking.
if I do it out of network, well, here's
Heartbreaking.
something interesting though. You're going to like this little story because Blue Cross Blue Shield, I know it's a small insurance. Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. Yeah,
That's what I have.
it's one of the largest insurances in the country. They sent me a letter, a very nice letter, saying if you don't document why you're charging the highest code 40 minutes or more every follow-up visit 100% of the time, we're going to reduce the reimbursement to your patients.
Percentage.
Right. And so they said, why is your practice unique? And so I wrote up a page and a half or whatever of single space stuff. And I thought, whenever you send something in, you're in big trouble because they can do whatever they want. So I sent it in and I got back, thank you so much for the great explanation of what you do. This is wonderful. And they said, you genuinely have been helping our patients. Continue what you're doing. Forget what we said. And my billing person said she has never seen leather this nice in their 35 years of billing experience ever. And this was signed Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. Anthem is the parent company of Blue Cross Blue Shield.
I'd have framed that letter.
I'm thinking of it, and I'm thinking of putting it in my office and framing it.
Yeah.
And putting the letter underneath so people understand what it is I do. But the point of it is they realized what I do, and they're, instead of bothering me, they're congratulating me. And
I put that on your website. I mean, I'm thinking,
I'm thinking of putting that on my website as well.
Absolutely.
But it's just a very powerful.
It says, that's fantastic. So there's hope. We've always got hope. Well, I want to thank Dr. Duniaef for joining the Starch Queens. Thank you so much. Heart disease is a topic that we all have to get serious about, learning more about, and living our best heart life as far as food goes and lifestyle. We've got to change our ways, people, or the heart. We can't. Nothing's going to happen in our life unless we've got a beating heart. So we've got to take care of it.
The heart doesn't grow fonder with more atherosclerosis or plaques.
Nope, it sure doesn't. That's for sure. So if you are interested in learning more about the Starch Queens program, you can join us and look us up at www.sqweightloss.com. Thank you again, Jeanne. It's great seeing you as always. Thanks, David.
You're welcome.
Good night. Good night, John Boy.
Good night, Mary Ellen.
Oh, we got it. All right. Yay. All right.
Good night.
I'm too young for that. I'm just kidding.